In an earlier lecture, we learned that there are several standard HTTP methods for the Hypertext Transfer Protocol to communicate from a client to a web server. The first three, GET, HEAD, and POST, were included in the HTTP 1.0 specification, and the others, options, put, delete, trace, and connect, were added in HTTP 1.1. We're going to take a closer look now at the two most frequently used methods, GET and POST, and understand what the difference is between the two of them. GET requests should only retrieve data from the server and should have no other effect. GET requests can be a conditional GET, and they can only retrieve information if it's been modified or unmodified since a certain time, if it matches or has ranges attached to it. This is handy for caching situations where you can check and only retrieve new information if it's newer than the cached version. You can also do a partial GET by including range headers, so when selecting a large file, you will only select part of it at a time. This is how a lot of streaming audio and streaming video systems work, where they only do a partial GET of a portion of the audio or video file each time they retrieve. And that's where you can run into buffering situations and things like that, because you'll do a partial GET, retrieve the first part of the file, and then if the next partial GET is slowed down, that's when your video will stop or stutter. GET requests are generally cacheable, but there are exceptions, and those exceptions can be set in the headers, in the response headers. GET queries, where you put a query on the end of a GET request, are often misused. And I've seen a lot of cases, and I've done it myself in the past, where GET queries are used to send information to the server. When you create an HTML form, you can specify its method as either GET or POST. And I've seen a lot of people use a GET request in a form where really that should be a form that lets you choose what data you want to display. It shouldn't ever be used in an HTML form where you are trying to submit information. A great example of a properly used one is this first example here, where I am requesting page equals 14. It's going to go to that website and retrieve page equals 14, but it's not actually trying to do anything to the server. However, if you use a login form and use a GET request, then as you can see here, the login.php, the username, and the password are exposed in the query. Now, because browsers usually remember where you've been, that means that username and password is going to get stored in your browser history, your URL history. And the other thing is these parameters will show up in the server logs. So server logs, which are generally stored in plain text, and they should only be accessible by administrators, but sometimes they can be accessed other ways. That username and password information is there. The other problem that you run into is this is the approach that is used for a blind SQL injection attack. A blind SQL injection attack, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this class when we get into security, is where the website or the attacker can send a query that is specifically crafted to change or manipulate the data. And this is a great example, the XKCD comic of Bobby Drop Tables, or Robert Drop Tables, I think his name is actually. That's where this kind of thing comes from. And again, we'll get into SQL injection attacks a little bit later when we talk about security, because I had a very interesting Monday morning a few years ago because attackers had finally figured out how to automate that sort of attack. Now, earlier we used a POST request to demonstrate how REST API connections work. So I'm going to give you an example here, and this will be a really great example of how this works and how things show up in the logs. I'm going to use curl again to make a request to the CIS-211 API, and you see I've got the username, the password stored in here. I'm requesting get product with a description of keyboard, and I get the data back. But you look at the log and you'll see that that username, password, and the entire request was included in the server log file. That's the problem that we're trying to avoid by using post requests when we are passing back and forth that sort of information. Post requests do not expose data in the URI query section. They send their data another way. Post requests are also good because they allow uploading binary files. They cannot be refreshed. So if you hit refresh on a page that's been submitted with post, you'll get a message that says that the thing is out of date, the page is out of date, and do you really want to resubmit the data again to make sure that that's what you wanted to do? And also the post responses are not cacheable because they're usually resulting in an action. A good way around that, and I've seen it in a lot of cases, is you submit data with a post. The post does what it wants to do and then redirects back to a GET request. And that way a browser will actually, the results that a browser sees on screen from a post request aren't the actual response from the post request. That response is just a redirect, usually a 301, sometimes a 302 redirect. And then the GET request coming off of that will be what the user sees. That way back button things work and other things like that. It's not always the case. And so these are things to watch out for when looking at the difference between GET and post. So that's all we really need to cover about GET and post requests. There are a lot more details about what all the other requests do and how they work, but really those would be specific more to doing development where you need to use those requests. This is really the key information that you need to take away from anything for server administration purposes, is understanding GET, understanding post, understanding the difference between those two. And then just remember that a head request is identical to a GET request, except that it does not return the data portion of the response. It only returns the headers of that GET request or that GET request response.